How are you, man? I'm Gil Roth, and you're listening to a bonus episode of my Virtual Memories Show podcast. This is a COVID check-in episode where I record with a past guest of the Virtual Memories Show to find out how they're holding up during the pandemic. As far as how I'm doing, it's a new week, and there's a big business call today that's kicking off a multi-month process. It's going to stretch into 2021. I got some anxiety about that, to be honest, but when I get to that part at the end of this show where I say I'm doing fine for money and I don't need new Patreon support and you should help other people, this is the work that puts me in that position. Now, as far as non-work stuff goes, I finished watching Tarkovsky's adaptation of Solaris yesterday. It was inspired by watching some of the Soderbergh one sometime in the last few weeks. But anyway, there was no line as good as the one in that Soderbergh one about how there are no answers, only choices. But it did have this great moment when one of the scientists on the station says to Kelvin, "Don't turn a scientific problem into a common love story." I like that. I got to do my bazillionth rereading of Solaris sometime. Although I now have a bunch of upcoming books from future past podcasts to get to. Most of them are in PDF, which is weird, but I'm going to have to read a whole ton of those and maybe do one of those every week or two and downshift the number of dailies. We'll see. Anyway, let's get to today's guest. Eddy Portnoy and I talked a few years ago when his first book came out. That was Bad Rabbi and Other Strange but True Stories from the Yiddish Press. It's a great collection of stories that turned up as Eddy was researching old Yiddish newspapers in his gig at the YIVO Institute. As befits a guy who made Yiddish his focus of study, Eddy's got a pretty wry sense of humor. That's all the intro you're going to need. As far as caveats go, not a lot. Audio's fine. It's a little muted in terms of being done with an internal computer mic. Nobody says anything embarrassing. No cats, kids, or dogs interrupt the show. Now here's me and Eddy. How are you coping? How are you dealing?
Well, that's...
It's a fraught question.
It is a fraught question. It's weird. I don't mind being at home. I like my apartment. I have a comfortable couch. Although, after like 5-6 weeks of working at home and being on the couch, my wife said that, the couch has taken on the shape of my body. I may be developing bed sores. It's not, no, that's not true. That second part is not true. The first part may be true. But
another couple of weeks.
Right. Yeah. But it's weird. Like, so I live in Harlem and, I have a street facing apartment, and typically, on the weekends or when whenever I'm home during the day, it's, there's this ambient noise that you hear all the time. It's construction, traffic, people in the street. There's always this sort of a certain level of basic noise, and that's, almost completely disappeared. And all you hear is silence and sirens. And so that's kind of disconcerting. But that's sort of, what we're dealing with right now.
And do you get out? Do you see what the neighborhood's like at all? Are people,
Yeah,
I know people are staying off the streets, but are people staying in, masks, et cetera, to try to cut down on things when they're out?
Yeah, it's sort of, I wear a mask. My whole family wears a mask. The dog doesn't wear a mask. Maybe she should. But it's sort of a grab bag. Some people wear masks, some people don't. There's this whole issue with like people jogging who don't wear masks. And there's this, some article came out saying that they give off more sweat, but I think that sweat doesn't matter, but they sort of give off more
the droplets
juice,
and all that.
Right. Than other people. So like that, whenever you see that, I ride a bike around. So people are still sort of hanging out on corners, but you do see a lot of people in masks. It's, and people are, kind of talking at a distance. You don't see people hanging out in large groups. Or at least I haven't seen it.
Yeah. does your background in Yiddish papers and, sort of history of Yiddish culture, anything in there prepare you for this sort of situation? Seeing what, either diseases, plagues, etc., may have been like in the
Right.
quote unquote the old country?
So, it doesn't really prepare you for it because, no matter how much you read about something, when you experience it, it's entirely
Sure.
new. But there are certain things, like I'm a historian of the Yiddish press, and so I was well aware of the the post World War I, 1918 flu epidemic. There are lots of articles about that in Yiddish newspapers. I mean, and really in all newspapers. And people, mention that gets discussed. Nowadays it's somewhat different, but that was in the papers. You also have in Yiddish, there's a kind of curse or an expression that you say to someone. You say a cholera after. It's like you should get cholera. So in the old country in Eastern Europe, cholera epidemics were a real issue, and they occurred every once in a while. And I did happen to find in a Yiddish newspaper in the Vorwärts in 1923, there's a serialized short novel by a writer whose name is Joiner Rosenfeld, which it's called The Plague, and it's about a cholera epidemic in a shtetl in Eastern Europe in like 1890 or thereabouts, and it's pretty interesting. The way that he's writing the story in the early. Actually, what's interesting is he's writing the story in the wake of the flu epidemic of 1918. It gets published in 1923, but it's really this epidemic that takes place in the 1890s. So there's this whole sort of historical trajectory, and kind of looking back at how it was in the old country. This guy is now in New York, but there's this sort of historical memory of these types of events, affecting communities really seriously.
Yeah, what are you able to work on at this point? What do you find yourself? And are there projects you've sort of initiated during the almost 2 months now?
Right, I know it's crazy. So I'm still actually working. I work for YIVO. Which is the YIVO Institute for Jewish Research, which is part of the Center for Jewish History. We're just not in the office. So I've done a bunch of sort of online lectures. I'm working on, one of the things I do for YIVO is I do exhibits, and I'm working on one with the United Nations that's supposed to go up at the UN in January, I think. And that's actually on displaced persons after World War II. So some of that material is online, and I'm able to do the work. Some of it is not. So that's sort of disconcerting because you can do some of it and you can't do all of it, and it's just kind of weird. You have to sort of pick and choose what you're able to do. Other things that I'm working on are. A book project about these two guys who I've actually worked on for years, Zoni and Yossel Kotler, who were very active in the Yiddish press as cartoonists. And I have been working on these guys for like 25 years since graduate school. And they're incredibly fascinating characters. They produced a Yiddish puppet theater together. They have this whole amazing body of cartoon work that appeared in Yiddish newspapers. They were book illustrators. They did really, really fantastic, really kind of avant-garde modernistic work in the field of illustration and painting and sculpture as well. So being at home and sort of having a lot of material, actually, because I started working on them in grad school, I have like 1 million photocopies of articles and, illustrations and all kinds of things that relate to them. So that's actually sitting in boxes in my house that I can use. So I'm, that's something that I'm able to work on. But it's one of the weird things about me is I have a hard time working at home. I very much,
How so?
I'm sorry?
How so?
Oh, how so?
Yeah.
So I created this dichotomy where home is for, non-work activity, and the office is for work. So it's like, I don't have a home office. I could sit at the dining room table and do work. Mostly I just, like I told you, like at the outset, I mostly just sit on the couch. So, in fact, the lectures that I gave for Evo were me sitting on the couch.
Yeah.
So, and every,
did you have a good bookshelf behind you?
no, that's actually,
apparently a big
that's
thing.
right. That's the big thing. I know. I actually have pillows behind me. One of which is a needlepoint of Wilma Flintstone that my mom made when I was a kid.
Yeah.
So, whatever. I have this weird, it's like a collection of weird pillows, but that's, yeah. And so what's funny is every Zoom meeting, for work, we have, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 Zoom meetings a week. And I'm always on the couch, and sort of everyone's kind of making fun of me because everyone else is, in front of a bookshelf.
Yeah.
That's the standard, setup. But I could do that if I wanted, but it's much more comfortable on the couch. Why should I get up?
I think the green screen and like Star Wars background going on behind you is probably a better.
Oh yeah, that's true. That is definitely true. Yeah, some people do that. Like people have like beach scenes or city scenes. I think people could be a little bit more creative, but they're not.
Now, when I was recording with Creota Wilberg a couple of days ago, she and the cartoonist Bob Sikoriak lived together for 30 years now, and apparently their domestic equilibrium was to pull a curtain between each of their cartooning spaces, and that was the curtain is the indicator of don't talk to me. Once a curtain's pulled, it's okay to shoot the breeze, but because she was used to working off site, she had her studio stuff at home, but did so much of her work, in a reading room where she was doing her research, that it became this, we have to have something in place to kind of, make sure this is a work area for both of us. But yeah, I can imagine if you're really accustomed to keeping that split, it's not just tough to work at home, but tough to then cordon off the work, instead of letting it bleed into everything you do. So.
Right. Yeah. It's, the dog's hanging around, kids are hanging around. It's, it generally works out. It's not that bad, but it's harder to focus.
Mm. Are there things you feel you've gotten better at in the last couple of weeks, either as far as that goes or just aspects of research or writing that, not sure if I could have been able to do this going down to the office every day?
Yeah, definitely not. 0.
Okay.
I've gotten better.
Just making sure.
I have gotten better at nothing.
Have you figured out your Zoom angle at least? Is there an angle that looks halfway decent for you?
Yeah, that's actually what I have done. So every winter I grow a beard, or at least like the last 3 winters, I just I stop shaving because I get tired of
Inertia.
it. Right.
Inertia.
And so I think I stopped at the end. I stopped shaving at the end of December, and I never resumed. So I have this kind of crazy hobo beard that I don't know. It looks weird. It's not like people in the Zoom meetings are like, when are you going to get rid of that? Because it's really, they want to, like, if I stood on the corner with a coffee cup, people would give me money.
I was going to go more in a Haredi direction with this, but yeah, that's good too.
Yeah.
Now, beyond the work stuff, are you reading, watching, listening to like things that are non-work related? Are you able to decompress that way?
A little bit. I was reading, actually, one of the interesting things that I found was I was digging, I have a lot of boxes of books here. Like my apartment's not big enough to sort of house all our books. And so some of them are in boxes. And in one, I found this amazing book that I bought when I was in 7th grade. So I guess this is in like 1978. and it's called The Black Plague, and it is about. And I remember, like, the reason I kept the book all these years, that I just remembered when I read it in seventh grade, I remembered liking it. And I never reread it. It just sort of traveled from apartment to apartment, in the bottom of a box. But I took it out, obviously there's a lot of relevance to what's happening now, and the story is how the Black Plague, a rat-borne plague, enters New York City in 1977. So you have this same phenomenon of a pandemic occurring, but it's in late 1970s New York, which makes the context totally different and really interesting. So I've been reading that here and there, and it's just like just to compare it to what's going on today is amazing. It's incredibly similar. It's like, whoever wrote this, and it was written by two people, one of whom was a doctor, and it's got all this, medical information in it that is really the same stuff they're telling us today. Mm-hmm. So it's really fascinating.
Did it convey the boredom aspect of all this?
It doesn't because I haven't read. I'm only about a third into it right now, so it might, but I really don't think it does.
No, to me that's the most interesting part. Perversely, that everybody has something. You have to put some sort of heroic narrative in place or doomed apocalyptic thing. Nobody seems to ever capture we just sat around on the sofa until it took on our body shape.
Right.
Like that part of pandemic and global catastrophe. Yeah, doesn't seem to be it wasn't in anybody's framework, I guess.
Right. I mean, then you didn't have, the internet, you didn't have Netflix, you didn't have all this, like there's all this sort of self-contained entertainment that's available, 24 hours a day. So it makes it really different. Like, everyone I know is watching tons of TV, lots of documentaries. I watched the Jim Woodring documentary yesterday. I
keep meaning to do that.
Oh, it's great. Whatever. It's like there's a ton of really interesting stuff that you could literally just sit on your couch and watch. So it's not, it's not as boring as it would be in the late 70s, where you're kind of relegated to network TV and reading.
Yeah, going back in that respect, the degree of communication of information from the old Yiddish papers, like when you talk about the 1918 flu, how difficult, I guess, was it for people to understand what was actually happening, or having to wait, until another newspaper comes out or somebody comes to the shtetl to explain,
right? Yeah,
you all have to, quarantine.
Right. So that's an interesting question, because, one of the interesting things is, on the one hand, they had familiarity with these kind of epidemics or plagues or, whatever you want to call them, because like I mentioned about this story earlier, they experienced them in the old world. But another aspect of this is news and news delivery. Like today, we're completely deluged with information. We don't even know how to handle it. There's so much information from so many different sources, and it arrives so quickly, and it's hard to digest it intellectually, emotionally. There's just so much. And so 100 years ago, news delivery was limited essentially to newspapers. Radio hadn't been invented until the mid-20s, or it didn't become commercial until the mid-20s. So in 1918, you only have newspapers, and this is always something that I try. When I taught at Rutgers, I always try to convey this to my students. How news delivery has changed so drastically. I would try to explain how people had to leave their houses to get news. If you lived in New York City in 1918, you would have to walk out of your apartment building, walk to the corner, and buy a newspaper from some grizzled old man or some kid with a runny nose. This is just how that was news delivery then. And if something was really important, they would have extra, newspapers would print extra editions. Everyone knows from old movies, this extra, read all about it. Well, an extra was a physical object. An extra was like an extra newspaper edition that was printed, at whatever time of the day with, enormously important news. This idea that at that time you really had to wait until a new paper was printed in order to get news is totally alien to what's happening now, because we just, like I said, there's so much and it comes so fast. You don't know, people don't know how to handle it.
Mm-hmm. And that's one of the perils I found throughout this is trying to make sense. You look at these tables of numbers and positives and tests and fatalities, and you try to figure out some sort of pattern or trend line from it. And then a day later, it all gets blown up. And the idea that, we're trying to make any sort of I'd say narrative out of it, or just any way of forming this stuff into something that makes sense.
Right.
Or that appears to have an arc. That's been a big tendency of mine, and I think other people's, and a challenge.
Right. Yeah. All of these charts and sort of studies, it's hard to tell because there are so many different variables. Some people have been tested, most people haven't been tested. There aren't enough tests. That's very clear. And so you have these charts showing the number of cases, but we don't really actually know the number of cases because we can't, because not everyone's been tested.
Yeah. There have been several past guests of the show, and I'm glad you're not among them, who got nailed with this, got hit with novel coronavirus, but haven't been hospitalized and haven't been tested. It's bad. I was able to stay home for 3 or 4 weeks to recover, and I'm doing better now. I'm like, they are not going to show up on the stats, but
right. Yeah.
Out of 300 plus people, there's 5 of them so far who have, responded saying that they've, they're going through it in various stages.
Right. I have friends who are in the same situation. I have a friend who, I think in March, his son he was at a study abroad program in England, and he came home, complained that he lost his sense of smell. Everyone in the house got it. Fortunately, no one had to go to the hospital. No one got tested, but everyone had that same symptom. They lost their sense of taste and smell. They all got had like flu-like symptoms for, about 10 days, and then they recovered. And I know about, a number of people like this.
Mm-hmm. I would say it's a nice thing that so far Jews aren't being blamed.
Oh no, they are. They are. They definitely are. Yeah, they definitely are. Come on, that's a totally, for a certain segment of the population, that's a completely normal and desirable reaction to be able.
I was going to say, it hasn't taken off as much, except of course Rockland County, but there hasn't been as much demonizing of us I've seen.
Right. But, I read an article the other day about how anti-Semitism has increased, a certain double-digit percent, based just on, blame that's being doled out. That would be a totally normal thing to have happen. I
was going to say that in that case, it's good. At least some things stay stable, even if it's hatred of us. At least we have something we can fall back on and say things haven't changed that much.
Yeah, Jew hatred is a pretty standard thing that is obviously unfortunately unavoidable, but that's it's a go-to for a lot of people.
Oh yeah. Now, speaking of go-tos, place you're dying to get back to, besides the office, of course. One thing you really would just love to go visit, or restaurant you'd want to hit, or something that would say things are normal?
Oh, God. That's a good question. I don't know. One of my problems is over the last 2 years, I've traveled so much for my book that I got really sick of traveling.
It'd be something in New York. It doesn't have to be,
Yeah.
bugging out.
Yeah, I would say like any crappy restaurant. You know what? Melba's would be great. Not that it's a crappy restaurant. Melba's is a great restaurant. Melba's soul food restaurant, like on 115th or 114th and 8th Avenue. Great catfish and waffles. I would totally go for that. Can't get it right now.
Yeah, I was expecting a dairy restaurant reference after
right,
Ben
yeah.
Catcher.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah, you know what? I guess B&H Dairy is still around. That's one place. I could go for a pastrami at Katz's. I would also obviously love to go to Russ and Daughters. I had a friend who 2 days ago begged me to drive him to Russ and Daughters because they're still doing, like, their takeout place is still working.
Good. Yeah. And I assume you did not.
Yeah, I was like, I'm not. No, I was not. Yeah. I guess I could have done it, but I'm not. I guess I'm too late.
I'm sort of interested in finding out, not about the takeout service, but just what it's like driving in Manhattan now. Because a guest a few days ago she lives about 40 minutes north. We both said, we're kind of tempted to just drive to the city, not to stop anywhere, not to get exposed to anything, but just to drive around New York with nobody in the city and see,
So
how fast we can go, but just what it's like.
Right. I've done it over the last couple of weeks. I've done it like 3 times, and it's kind of nice. It's like driving in the middle of the night in a way. Although in the middle of the night during normal times, you could, in certain places, you could still wind up with traffic. But
it's all cabs. Yeah, or maybe now it's all Ubers. But back in my old days,
right,
you'd see a flock of cabs coming down.
Right, but it's like there's no traffic. Like I'm still riding around on my bike, and it's kind of great because there's a lot less worry, just because there's so few cars. It's actually pretty nice. Maybe they'll institute, that kind of fee where if you go below 86th Street, you have to pay and you'll wind up with less cars. I don't know. I think in Paris and in Amsterdam, they've banned cars from a lot, significant parts of the cities.
They said Milan wants to expand the sidewalks and also make bike lanes in a lot of areas that are just cars now. And there is this sort of what we could do afterwards.
It would be amazing. I mean, I think that won't really happen here, but it could, and it would be great if it did. I would love to be able to, have wide boulevards or to ride my bike down with no cars. Bigger sidewalks would be amazing. New York is like a great bike and obviously pedestrian city. There's no reason why it shouldn't be, although, people love their cars.
Money.
Yeah, money. People do,
money and real estate.
Right. People do love their cars. That's, people do want to be taking places in cars.
Yeah. Now, given the Jewish /Yiddish /Zionist utopian perspective we always have, do you have any thoughts on sort of the post-pandemic world, things that could, like that, become better in terms of how we get by?
Yeah, I think that...
Do you spend time thinking about it?
I really don't. I'm like a bad predictor of these things. And if I do think about it, it's all downhill. It's much more of like a Planet of the Apes thing where, it's not,
we had it coming.
Yeah, right. Exactly. We did. We totally had it coming. Like that's so clear. But I don't, I'm a bad predictor of things. When you're dealing with humans, I don't think, utopia is in the offing in any which way. Even it's always going to be dystopia. Humans are the thing that they're best at is screwing things up. So
true.
That's what we do. That's what we do some cool things, but I think that if you look at the bulk of human history, it's like we really fucked this up.
I forgot. In addition to the utopian vision, we also have the Jew stand-up comic vibe that we have to account for too.
It's the comedy dystopia vibe. That's
somehow we'll make it through. Last question: any sort of reading project, non-work related? Anything you're looking at tackling if this goes on for X number of months? Like,
oh man,
I've always wanted to do Ulysses or anything Zelig like.
Well, like I said, I'm going through this old book, The Black Plague, that's from
Sure.
from 1977. There are a couple of books. Actually, I started it and then I stopped, and I want to finish it. It's this book called Disturbance. That's by this author named Philippe Lançon, and he was a writer at Charlie Hebdo. And this is the English translation of his sort of memoir of being in that terrorist attack and having survived it. And it's a very intense book. I've read a bit of it, and I want to finish that.
Oh, good. So you're doing the lighthearted escapist work. That's good to know.
Yeah, it fits the mood. What can I tell you?
Yeah, I hear you.
On the other hand, if you read something where everything is much worse, it kind of makes you feel better about your current situation.
Yeah, I'll take that as a positive.
Yeah, it's the best I can do.
Good job, Eddy. Thanks so much for coming on. I hope we talk in a couple of weeks, and that we're actually able to sit down together sometime and grab a knish or some pastrami down at Katz's.
I would love to. Thanks for having me on, Gil.
And that was Eddy Portnoy. Go check out his wonderful book, Bad Rabbi and Other Strange But True Stories from the Yiddish Press. It's published by Stanford University Press. There'll be a link for it in the show notes and episode notes for this one. Eddy also has some neat work he's doing at tablet.com, which I'll also link to in the episode. He does not have a website, which is for the best, but he is on Twitter, which will still destroy your productivity, as Eddy Portnoy, and that's EDDYPORTNOY. And we'll be back tomorrow with another COVID check-in. If you want to send me a little update to read on the air or have something you want to share with the listeners, let me know and we'll set something up. I'm at groth18@gmail.com. That's GROTH18. You can find my contact info at our websites, vmspod.com and chimeraobscura.com/VM. There are also all sorts of links to subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show, which will get you all of these COVID-19 bonus shows. But if you'd just like to see the list of the ones that I've done for this series, which began on March 25th, you can find a link to the COVID-19 sessions at both sites. And in case you're interested in the setup that I use to record these remote ones, as opposed to the in-person episodes that characterized the entire show before the pandemic, I am using Zencastr.com. That is ZENCASTR, so no final E. Zencastr is $20 a month, but as I say at the top of the episode, my Patreon supporters more than cover this, as does my day job, especially because I'm not spending money anymore on parking, tolls, subway trips, coffee, etc. for all of those in-person episodes I was doing every week. So if you can spare anything, do not give it to me. Go to the Patreons, Kickstarters, GoFundMes, Indiegogos, tip jars, whatever, for the artists, writers, and other creative people who you like, and show them some support. Or give to charity, give to your local food bank. If you can spare anything, then help someone in need. I am Gil Roth. It is Monday, April 27th, 2020, and this was a bonus episode of my Virtual Memories Show podcast. Thanks so much for listening. Keep the conversation going, stay safe, and wash your damn hands.